This is part one. So let's start with a simple question that almost everyone is asking right now. If inflation was supposed to be temporary, why does everything still feel expensive? Groceries, rent, school fees, travel, even basic services, nothing really came back down. To understand this, we need to forget the idea that inflation is just about prices going up for a short time. Inflation today is about a shift in how the world actually works. For nearly 30 years, we lived in a strange economic sweet spot. Products kept getting cheaper, or at least didn't get much more expensive. You could buy better phones, better TVs, better clothes, without paying much more each year. That made us believe low inflation was normal, but it wasn't normal. It was the result of very specific conditions lining up perfectly. First, globalization made everything cheap. Companies could manufacture wherever labor was cheapest. Raw materials could be shipped across oceans for almost nothing. Supply chains were stretched across the planet, optimized for cost, not safety. As long as nothing went wrong, prices stayed low. Second, labor was weak. There were lots of workers, populations were young, and unions had lost power in many countries. If someone didn't like the pay, there were 10 others ready to take the job. Wages stayed low, and since wages are a huge part of costs, prices stayed low too. Third, energy was relatively stable. Oil was abundant. Major energy shocks were rare. When energy is cheap and predictable, everything else becomes cheaper to produce and transport. Now here's the key point. All three of those pillars cracked at the same time. When COVID hit, supply chains didn't just slow down, they broke. Factories shut, ports clogged, shipping costs exploded. Suddenly, companies realized their entire business depended on systems that had zero backup. One delay in one country could shut down production worldwide. Governments responded by pumping massive amounts of money into economies to prevent collapse. That money was necessary, but it had a side effect. Demand bounced back faster than supply. People had money to spend, but fewer goods were available. Prices rose. At first, everyone said, "Don't worry, this will fade," and some of it did. Shipping costs came down, factories reopened, but something deeper had changed. Companies no longer trusted the old system. They started moving production closer to home, building extra inventory, paying for multiple suppliers instead of one. All of that makes supply chains safer, but also more expensive. Those costs don't disappear later. They become permanent. At the same time, workers realized something important. The system needs them more than they thought. Labor shortages appeared everywhere, from hospitals to restaurants to construction sites. People retired early, immigration slowed, birth rates stayed low. Suddenly, workers had leverage. When wages go up, that's good for workers, but it also means companies must charge more to stay profitable. And unlike temporary shipping costs, higher wages rarely go backwards. Once pay goes up, it tends to stay up. So already, we have two permanent forces pushing prices higher: safer but costlier supply chains and stronger labor bargaining power. Add energy to that mix, and inflation becomes even harder to kill. Energy markets are now unstable by default. Political conflicts, climate policies, underinvestment in fossil fuels, and expensive renewable transitions all add uncertainty. When energy is volatile, companies raise prices not just to cover today's costs, but to protect themselves from tomorrow's shocks. This is why inflation doesn't behave like it used to. In the past, prices spiked, then fell back. Today, prices spike, then settle at a higher level. The mistake most people make is expecting If inflation was just a temporary spike, wages would have caught up by now. That's the promise people are sold. Give it time. Markets will adjust. Higher pay is coming. But deep down, most Americans already know the truth. Paychecks never seem to fully catch up. You might get a raise, but somehow your lifestyle still feels tighter. This isn't bad luck, and it's not because you didn't negotiate hard enough. It's structural. Look at the last 40 years. Productivity in the United States has gone up massively. Technology, automation, software, AI, logistics. Workers today produce far more value per hour than their parents ever did. In a fair system, wages should have risen at the same pace. They didn't. What actually happened is this. Wages rose slowly, while the cost of living rose steadily, and asset prices exploded. That gap is where the middle class started to crack. Here's the key idea most people never hear. Wages are reactive, prices are proactive. Prices adjust fast. Companies can raise prices instantly. Landlords raise rent yearly. Insurance premiums update automatically. Tuition goes up like clockwork. Subscription fees creep higher without asking permission. Wages don't work like that. Wages are sticky. They move slowly. They depend on negotiations, budgets, HR approvals, performance reviews, and economic conditions. By the time wages adjust, inflation has already moved on. So even when you get a raise, it often just helps you tread water, not move forward. Now, zoom out to the bigger picture. Inflation doesn't hurt everyone equally. If you own assets, stocks, real estate, businesses, inflation can actually help you. Asset prices usually rise with inflation. Debt gets cheaper in real terms. Wealth compounds. If you rely mostly on wages, inflation hits harder. Your income is capped, but your expenses aren't. That's why inflation quietly widens inequality. This is also why the phrase, just earn more, is misleading advice. Yes, higher income helps. But when inflation is systemic, individual effort alone can't outrun it for most people. And here's where the system becomes self-reinforcing. Companies face rising costs, materials, energy, logistics. They pass those costs to consumers, but they resist raising wages at the same pace because labor is their biggest expense. So they automate, outsource, cut hours, increase productivity demands. From a business perspective, it makes sense. From a worker's perspective, it feels like running on a treadmill that keeps speeding up. Now layer in globalization and competition. American workers don't just compete with other Americans. They compete with global labor markets. Technology makes it easier to replace or supplement human labor. That puts a ceiling on wage growth, even as prices continue rising. So inflation keeps moving forward, but wages are boxed in from multiple directions. Then there's housing, the biggest pressure point for most Americans. Housing used to be a stabilizer. Now it's a destabilizer. Low interest rates pushed housing prices up for years. Cheap money flooded into real estate. Investors, hedge funds, and institutional buyers entered the market at scale. Homes became assets first, shelter second. When rates finally went up, prices didn't crash the way many expected. Instead, affordability collapsed. Monthly payments skyrocketed. Rent followed. So even people with good jobs found themselves locked out. This is critical. Housing inflation isn't just a side effect. It's a central driver of long-term inflation pressure. Once housing costs rise, everything else feels more expensive because rent and mortgages eat the biggest chunk of income. And unlike gas or food, housing prices don't easily come back down. Now let's talk about something even more uncomfortable. Inflation changes behavior. When people believe money will be worth less tomorrow, they stop saving and start spending or speculating. Why hold cash that's losing value? Why wait? This mindset pushes money into stocks, crypto, real estate, collectibles, anything that feels like it might outrun inflation. That pushes asset prices even higher, making entry harder for latecomers. It's a feedback loop. At the same time, savers get punished. Traditional savings accounts lose value in real terms. Conservative financial behavior stops being rewarded. This flips the psychology of money on its head. And governments know this. Moderate inflation encourages spending. Spending keeps GDP growing. Growth looks good politically. Deflation, on the other hand, scares policymakers because people delay purchases and debt becomes harder to manage. So the system quietly prefers inflation over stability. Now connect this back to wages. When inflation rises, companies say they can't raise pay because of uncertainty. When inflation slows, they say margins are tight. When times are good, they prioritize shareholders. When times are bad, they cut costs. Either way, wages lag. That's why the middle class feels squeezed from both sides. Income growth capped, costs uncapped. And here's the psychological toll no one talks about. People feel like they're failing personally, like they made bad choices, like they didn't work hard enough. But in reality, they're reacting rationally to a system that's quietly shifting the goalposts. This is why so many Americans feel anxious despite low unemployment numbers. Why side hustles feel mandatory. Why debt feels unavoidable, why normal life feels expensive. Inflation isn't just an economic issue anymore, it's a quality of life issue. And this brings us to the next layer of the problem, interest rates. People think high interest rates are the cure for inflation. But rates are a blunt tool. They slow borrowing, yes, but they also raise costs everywhere else. Mortgages, car loans, credit cards, business financing. Higher rates don't remove money from the system. They just change who feels the pain first. And here's the trap. Rates can't stay high forever without breaking something big. So policymakers walk a tightrope. Slow inflation without collapsing debt markets. That usually means inflation cools but never fully resets, which is why inflation doesn't end. It normalizes at a higher level. In the next part, we'll go even deeper into why money printing never really stops, why debt makes inflation permanent, and why the future looks more inflationary, not less. This isn't pessimism, it's pattern recognition.